So we have everyone. So let's, I think, get right to it. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar after the protests. What comes next for democratic mobilizations in South Asia? So on behalf of the Asia Democracy Network and South Asians for Human Rights, thank you all for joining us today. And a very warm welcome as well to our speakers, Anjali, Swastika Arulingam, Muntasir, and Avinash, and to our moderator, Deeksha. Thank you all for making the time to be with us. So over the past few years, we have seen some really significant moments of people-led mobilizations across South Asia. We've seen young people and citizens take to the streets in response to concerns around governance, accountability, economic conditions, corruption, democratic participation, and in many cases, a sense that existing political and institutional systems were no longer responding to their concerns. We've seen this in Sri Lanka through the Aragalaya and in Bangladesh and Nepal through significant student and youth-led mobilizations, and more recently in India through the Cockroach Janta party. While each of these experiences is very different, there are also some interesting questions that connect them. What brings people on to the streets in the first place? What allows a protest mobilization to gain momentum? And perhaps the most difficult question, what happens when the protests end? Because the end of a protest does not necessarily mean the end of the grievances that brought people together. And it doesn't necessarily mean the end of the networks, relationships, or political energy that were created through that mobilizations. So sometimes we see protesters move into formal politics. Sometimes they continue their work through civil society or other forms of advocacy. And sometimes movements fragment, and sometimes what appeared to be a very powerful movement, a moment of mobilization, struggles to translate into longer-term institutional or political change. And I think that's particularly interesting in the South Asian context, where we've seen several major mobilizations in a relatively short period of time. And there's also the question about how we understand these experiences in the first place. Are all large-scale protests necessarily movements, or are some better understood as moments of mass mobilization? And what determines whether a protest movement develops into something more sustained? So today, rather than looking at these protests only as individual events, we wanted to use them to think about the longer trajectory of people-powered mobilizations in South Asia, what these mobilizations have achieved, what they have not achieved, what has happened to the people involved, and what they might tell us about the future of democratic participation in the region. So we are particularly pleased to have perspectives that allow us to look at this from different angles. We'll begin with India and the Cockroach Janta Party, then look at the experience of Sri Lanka's Aragalaya years later. We'll then broaden the discussion to look at some of the regional trends across South Asia. And finally, bringing the perspectives of civil society and its relationship with youth-led mass mobilization. So we want this to be a conversation rather than four separate presentations. We'll have 2 rounds of questions, giving each speaker an opportunity to first share their perspective and then to respond to some of the broader themes emerging from the discussion. We'll then open the floor to questions from participants. We're hoping to keep the program to 1 hour, so we would really appreciate everyone helping us to keep to the time allocated, particularly given that we have 4 speakers and want to leave enough time for the audience Q&A. And finally, just to mention that the discussion is being live streamed on Asia Democracy Network's YouTube channel. So we also welcome those joining us from there. With that, I don't want to take up any more of our speakers' time, and I'm going to hand over to Deeksha to take us through the discussion. Deeksha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sapra, and I think you've given a good overview of what's happening in South Asia these days. Thank you to our speakers. I know very especially to Muntasir. I know you joined us very last minute, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Let's not take a lot of time, like what Sabra said. I think it has to be a conversation, but let me first, for the audience, introduce all of y'all. We've got Anjali from India, who is the AISA Secretary at the Delhi University. We've got Swastika Arulingam from Sri Lanka, President of the United Federation of Labour. We've got Muntasir Rahman, an activist, human rights activist from Bangladesh. And we've also got Avinash Kumar, who's a distinguished fellow at the Center for Equity Studies, Delhi. So let's start our conversation first, as I said, with Anjali, and to understand the CJP and to understand the mobilization. Anjali, can you take us through the context in which the Cockroach Janta Party emerged, the grievances and demands that brought young people together, and what you think made this mobilization resonate at this particular moment?
So yeah, first of all, thank you so much for organizing this, and I from all institution. The phenomena emerged. It did not emerge out of nowhere, or it was not random. It was authentic, explosive. I would say articulation of the 12 years of accumulated oppression, anger, frustration of the youth of the country against a very communal, corporate-driven state has been trying to inflict all sorts of violence in terms of privatizing education, in terms of implementing policies such as education policy, and in every form trying to have a structure as to who will get education, be it primary level education, be it secondary level education, and of course, still the government part. So when the NEET UG paper leak erupted and there was
Anjali, sorry to disturb you, you're breaking up a little bit. Would you, maybe it's better if you can switch the camera off and we can try? Uh, because you're breaking up. Let's see whether that's a bit better. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
so I was just saying how there
Much.
were different protests that interrupted across different parts of the country when the NEET UG paper leak happened, and then there was this uh, comment made by the CJI Chief Justice of India, calling the youth of the nation cockroaches, parasite, calling people who are activists, who would put RTI acts, and who would want to seek answer from the government. He made a comment saying that all of them are cockroaches. And of course, this also gained a very huge traction, and a lot of people resonated with this. So, from the very first day when the 6th June protest happened, the CJP leadership reached out to ISA and other organizations as well. And we, understanding the historic duty or the burden that we carried, we had to go there, given the level of people who were resonating with this issue. And in the past 10 years, 89 plus papers have been leaked under this regime. And similarly, as I told about the new education policy and how it traces its emergence from the capitalist blueprints of the Birla Ambani report, and the state had excessively prioritized privatization, commercialization. In the past 5 years only, 13,626 students coming from SC, ST, OBC communities had dropped out from higher education. We see reservation being totally not implemented in different parts of the universities, be it in public universities as well. Of course, in private sector, reservation is not implemented. Along with that, we see deep-seated caste-based discrimination from institutional models of student to different things. And this is the recent data that on an average, 25 public schools are shut down every single day in India, accumulating to over 93,000 public schools closed in last decade. So what made CGP or this cockroach phenomena distinct and enabled it to capture the national attention? First, of course, the terminology itself, because historically, ruling classes, fascist regimes have weaponized such dehumanizing terms like cockroaches to vilify marginalized identities, caste minorities, racially marginalized identities as well. But what happened here, the nomenclature of CJP subverted this dehumanization into something. It turned into a form of reclamation that yes, this is precisely what we have been treated like. We have no jobs. There is a whole, attempt to make people fight between each other. There is a whole communal angle, communal venom spewed into different forms. There's a whole capture of the mainstream media that does this very deliberately. And along with this, there has been a human cost also that also raged this, also fueled this, if I can say. 13,000 students are killed every year by this regime, 13,000 suicide every year. When we sat for 40 days on Jantar Mantar while this movement was going on, 22 students committed suicide. And this is exactly after the new paper leak, the net paper leak. There were discrepancies found in different areas, different states of the country. 7 to 8 more people leaked also in these 40 days. So, what CJP and the whole phenomena, the protest resonated because it did not exist in isolation. It synthesized the foundations laid by the prior historic mass movements, be it the anti-CANRC struggle led by the Muslim women, asserting that nobody has the right, be it the BJP RSS regime, to snatch away our citizenship. Then there were the year-long farmers' movement where 700 farmers were martyred, the restless agitation against sexual harassment, and we see this all build up to the process where people felt that there is no more bowing down. And on the this protest also, on the stage also, we saw labor leaders coming and raising slogans against the labor laws, against the criminalizing of forming union, women organizations coming and asserting their voice against the culture of impunity that has been perpetuated by this regime, where the models like Brij Bhushan, Prijwal Ravanna, Kuldeep Sengar, these are all MPs, MLAs, and big shot leaders of BJP who are protected by this regime, who have hundreds of and very, very severe rape cases, allegations against them. So I think of it as more as a accumulation and a culmination of different aspects of anger that was there in the mass, and that it gave an articulation, it gave it a very expressive expression also.
Thanks a lot, Anjali. I think you've given a very comprehensive explanation, and also thank you for talking about there were the other protests that also led to other protests in India that led to this. Um, Over to you, Swastika. I know looking back at the Aragalaya now, 4 years after, what do you think the mobilization achieved in Sri Lanka? What did it leave unresolved? And where are the people and the networks that drove the Aragalaya today? What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you so much for having me in this conversation today. And I'm glad that Anjali finished observations with the phrase culmination of anger. And I think that is, we see a lot of similarities with the Sri Lankan struggle also, even though there were different struggles and so on. We also saw student protests for free education, or preserving free education. We saw teachers struggle before the Aragalaya. We saw farmers struggle. So there's so many things which happened in India. We sit in Sri Lanka and it resonates with us, thinking back at what happened in Sri Lanka. But since I am asked to speak about what happened, 4 years on, what happened in Sri Lanka, one of the things which happened pretty quickly soon after the Aragalaya, the active struggle fell on the ground, is how quickly the corporates in Sri Lanka managed to capture the government and eventually capture the state. How quickly they recognize that a new power or a new government or a new party is going to come into power, and they don't have a historical ties, or they have historically not worked with this party. So now how do we infiltrate into this party? How do we capture power? How do we influence it? And what we saw happening so rapidly is that while left movements in Sri Lanka and while people's movement in Sri Lanka were trying to imagine a new culture of governance, how quickly the corporates got very close to the party, very close to the president, the government. And very recently, there was an article in Sri Lanka which is actually talking about the corporate capture of this current government, which would not have come into power if not for the Aragalaya. So that is kind of like the anti-Aragalaya, or the I won't call it a revolution, but the anti-movement which happened after this moment of very brief moments of 5 months of hope which existed in Sri Lanka. And that 5 months, I don't want to underestimate it even at this point, because the place where the Aragalaya took place, which is called Galle Face in Sri Lanka. If you come to Sri Lanka, if you look at the place Galle Face, historically this place has been used for military buildings, for bureaucratic buildings, for hotels. It was not a place for ordinary people to come and camp out and have a time, enjoy normal life. It was for bureaucracy, it was for military, it was for hotels. And for 5 whole months, ordinary people who did not have claim onto that land, just came and just lived in that area. I was recently looking at some pictures where one person actually came and started growing a home garden in that area. That is the kind of reimagining of society which people believed in that time. And then, of course, the Aragalaya was crushed by the military, and then, of course, the corporate capture took place. So that is the negative side of or the kind of the looking 4 years back. You reflect on those days. But the good thing, some of the good things which happened during the struggle, which continues to this date, is that in my generations and the generations, the younger generation, people in their 20s and perhaps even in their late teens, we don't know what politics is, because party politics is not something which our generation resonates with. What happened in the 1950s, even 60s and 70s, right? Our generation, party politics was something which we felt alienated from. But with the Aragalaya, so many different movements came together. Like Anjali was saying, you found workers coming and going into a general strike. You found students leading the protests. You found women groups coming in. So many different people came in and they got to interact. And I think that connections and a new generation of activists have come into the mainstream on the ground. So much as the government has been captured by corporate interests, and we're dealing with labor law reforms, just like what's happening in India. We are dealing with privatization of pension funds. We are dealing with, we are continuing to dealing with what is happening to farmers, free education, and so on. But at the same time, a new generation of activists, even though they might not identify themselves as left, but left-leaning activists have come into the political space, and I see that as something which would not have happened without the Aragalaya. Thank you.
Thanks, Swastika. I think you brought out that very important point of our generation. Moving on to you, Muntas, we saw what happened in Bangladesh, and the student protests and the extreme number of loss of life that came about, as opposed to what happened in Sri Lanka or Nepal or India. You had a large number of lives lost also through your protests. But what do you think the mobilization achieved for you all in Bangladesh? As I asked Swastika before, what do you think it did not achieve? What it did not, is it any unresolved things that you all think? And where do the activists stand now?
Thank you for inviting me to this dialogue. So the July uprising was, a culmination of, 17 years, 15 years of, suppressed anger and oppression, and people felt very oppressed when the army regime came after the 2007's interim government. The Pilkhana BDR massacre happened, where 57 military personnel was killed. And then after that, back in 2013, there was also the fundamentalists protested, and there was a mass killing. And also for 3 years, there was a killing of bloggers and free thinkers. And there was like a severe fear of, terrorism in Bangladesh from 2013 to 2016. And after the Holy Artisan bombing incident, the government took lots of control. And after that, in 2018, the young school-going people started this safe road protest. And yeah, it was 2018, I think. Huh? And also at that time, the first quota movement was happened. You know, uh, what happened in 2024. So now, and we have seen the rigged elections for 3 times. We say that, Ratri election, the night election, that kind of thing. And there was heavy censorship was going on. And at the end of the Army League era, the fascist regime, we were seeing um, the very economic declination. We're seeing the reserve declination, and we're seeing um, massive unemployment. And also there was like heavy fear, heavy there was like lots of torture cell. And also activists were very silent, become very silent after the uh, y- lots of forceful protest. Um, after how army regime handled the protest and activist, there's a lot happened. Even the cartoonist, the students, there was like Digital Security Act. There's like a unimaginable thing, like the state, the institutions were destroyed totally. The democratic situation was totally destroyed. The Bangladesh was, we all thought it has become a one party state. And there is no chance for democracy at all at that point. Many believe that there won't be any democracy back in Bangladesh. But then, after 2024 election, how the students started the quota movement, because there was 56% quota, and there was like 30% of freedom fighters quota. Then the movement started, and on 16th July, and there was like attack by the student league, the on the students. And on the 16th July, we saw the how Abu Said died by police, and how people were dying every day. And this thing made people, the especially the middle class, the lower income class, they all came together. We have to save our children. We have to save our kids. That's how I also got involved. I got involved with the student coordinators, manage safe houses for them. And we have seen, and we have, among all the 4 countries, Bangladesh has the, highest level of life losses and the injuries. That much brutal the Bangladesh was. And after that, on 5th August, Sheikh Hasina regime toppled. Sheikh Hasina flew away at India, and then the interim government came. So we had lots of high hopes, because it was most of the people consisted from the civil society, whom we idolized and looked up to. But i- the interim government was one of the very weakest government in the Bangladesh history. And from the very first day, when Hasina flew away, the mob started to happen. And the way state acted, the way the advisors, or the also the right wing stakeholder took the front stage, and they claimed the credit for the July uprising. And other stakeholders, all the stakeholders who gave their efforts, like women, um, or the civil societies, or the left, or the indigenous people, or the religious minorities, um, mass people, they they were like step by step separated, from the process of getting involved. Like, we wanted to get involved in the new Bangladesh and the new politics. But I would say that it was very state sponsored, like the how the alienation happened. And although there were some positive things, like they proposed lots of reforms, initiative which is very necessary, but but they alienated lots of communities, like from LGBT community. When they asked to join in the conversation, they were totally denied. Also, the women's affair commissions, they submitted a huge report that was totally not included in the reform commission at the end. And they were also threatened by the right wing people openly. And there was, but also we were heavily disappointed, but we also have seen like how there was like a response to that kind of you know alienation or separation and mob justice and threatening. Like we did Moitri Jatra. It was a intersectional movement after that. But there was like it was a very unstable time, and we did not know like which party to trust. And there was like mostly right wing people, right wing what can I say? Right wing parties were at the front. And after the election, now the BNP government, the Nationalist Party, is in power. But we're seeing the same thing, the how we were involved in the July uprising. We don't see that the people are getting the chance to participate in the policy making. There's lots of controversial policy making is happening. So
I want to
that kind
say
of thing.
we've seen that in all of the protests. If we look at Sri Lanka and even in Nepal, we don't see the people speaking up after the protests, and they've lost their space. So let me
Mhm.
there and let's go on to this. Let me come back to you again on that. Avinash, I would also like for you to speak, look at the more regional argument about the role of civil society in these youth-led protests. Because what we saw is that these protests sparked, but the spark was from the youth. So from the perspective of, as we civil society, how should we understand the relationship between established civil society and the newer, more often youth-led protest mobilizations such as the CJP?
Thanks, Diksha, once again, and Sabra for having me for this conversation. And before I come to civil society, I would like to once again, simply because why we need to address the question of civil society, which is almost like a elephant in the room, especially among the conversationalists like us. Uh, we do need to go back to the context. Anjali, Muntasir, Swastika, they all talked about it, but allow me to also build quickly onto the, especially insofar as India is concerned, and also then draw some regional similarities. So India, three things, and I think Muntasir talked about it in the context of Bangladesh. But one, very quickly, I mean, the present regime has completely captured and subverted all forms of democratic institutions. So it's not just the media, mainstream media, but parliamentary democracy as we know it, uh, other independent autonomous institutions of democracy which are supposed to actually preserve, election commission, judiciary, all of them are highly compromised today. So you don't have, so in that sense, you're working in the last 10 to 12 years in a context where you don't have any institution, independent autonomous institution, we can put a check on the present regime. Second, in the context of India, let's realize that this actually the current government we are talking about, it came as a minority government in 2024. It did not win a full majority. It's standing on the crutches of other support from other regional political parties. And yet, that sense, in some senses, they learned a lesson from that even more crudely, and they have hollowed out all forms of actually electoral democracy after that, which has resulted in massive disenfranchisement of voters, for example, through what is being called special intensive revisions of voters. Millions of voters are being denied the right to vote. And after that, subsequently, they've learned so that, and this has happened across India. We have seen some of its outfall happening in some of the recent elections in Bihar and West Bengal and so on. And that is happening. So in that sense, what has happened is that you have virtually made it impossible for the political opposition to even formally perform its role the way it was supposed to perform in a functioning democracy, either inside the parliament or on these streets. You have literally hollowed out. And the third, and which has been a continuing legacy of this government, is that actually deploying all sorts of punitive agencies to actually create a blanket climate of fear, and which not only targets political opposition, but all forms of thing. I mean, Anjali talked about CA, NRC. We still have 6 years down the line, we still have young students languishing inside the prisons for want of basic trial and so on. So this is the kind of scenario where even common people were completely under this. Why am I building this context where you have made a democracy completely normal on the paper? It is in this context that I think we need to realize the current, just building on to what Anjali was saying, that Gen Z, CJP shifted the terrain completely from there. 60% of this country currently is under 35. I mean, I'm just trying to, which is 1.4 billion population. We have ongoing census going on. Next year, we'll get the final results of that, hopefully, if they are truthful. We don't know what's happening under this regime. But currently, as per estimates, 1.4 billion population, 65% under 35, and 50% of them under 30. So now you can understand that that's a context in which you are CJP, but not just CJP alone, which the way it is known as a party, but actually broadly builds an alliance with students' bodies like ISA, SFI, other left bodies. It builds alliances with even individual figures like Sonam Wangchuk, and so who come as larger respected figures whose appeal can cut across. And then you get support from even political opposition, organized political opposition, including the main opposition party led by Rahul Gandhi and some of the regional opposition party. So you do create a larger umbrella in that sense. So that's one achievement, definitely, precisely because everybody, it was not just education. Of course, it triggered from there. It was not just employment. Of course, it was triggered from all kinds of larger contexts of complete enveloping of which you wanted to break the climate of fear. And I think that was the trigger in which everybody came together and everybody found an opportunity and resonance led by this young generation. So I would say that was very critical. And it is in this context, one other important thing which this movement did was to destroy this manufactured aura of grandeur of this current regime in the form of the prime minister, through mockery, through satire, through all kinds of slogans. And I think that is something which is not possible so far in the given form, limited form of political opposition. I think this is where they shifted the terrain, which was the domain of the ruling party so far, where they lampoon the opposition, they crack jokes at the expense of anybody who spoke against them. This time it was the young protesters who were doing it. And that I think broke that climate of fear which I'm talking about. And these two were extremely important instruments for mobilizing. And third, of course, Instagram revolution, as we all know. And that's where Nepal comes into the mind, that how that movement got triggered because of ban on social media. Instagram revolution was not just for India, not just for this region. All of us, I'm sure, were glued for those 72 hours, 48 hours, 5 days, and not just across country, but across region and beyond. I know that so many of us, it was like a live telecast. Why am I talking about this? But that's where civil society's role comes in very critically. And I will take it in quickly two ways. One is that let's think of civil society as a far more differentiated way compared to the way we tend to understand. You have trade unions going there, you have women's organizations going there, you have independent human rights activists, very well-known human rights activists who were sitting there, extending their support, etc. You had also solidarity social movements actually providing logistics, etc., etc. Yet it was what we know as the organized civil society, very often reduced to NGOs, very often, which seem to be missing from many of these. I'm not talking about simply India, but also from the other parts of the, I think in Bangladesh also, in Nepal also, Swastika, and you can talk about Sri Lanka more perhaps and so on. And I think there it was, I would say in some senses, a very silent support, many of them individual capacity, but at the same time, I do remember during the peak of this movement, IDR, one of the prominent Indian CSO journals, development journals, actually, there was a letter in that castigating civil society organizations for not putting their voice as a as a singular unitary voice. And it was very clear marker of self-reflection that in some senses what is called organized NGO sector has failed to extend its solidarity, and it needs to reflect on it. While there were protests against that, they said that we are very much there, but look at what is happening. We are dependent on funding and all kinds. Even as we speak right now, there's a FCRA bill hanging in the parliament, is being debated to further make a draconian law further, and so on and so forth. So we have to be very careful. The question, however, remains that how was civil society still caught, one, unaware, second, failed as a sector in that sense to extend its solidarity beyond mere lips, words. And I think that would remain a question for all of us to reflect on. And I will stop here right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Avinash. I think you ended on a very good point about extended solidarity. Let me next move to Swastika, because I think Sri Lanka gives us a longer view of what happens after the mass mobilization. And you also mentioned about party politics and that angle of it. Let me ask you, is entering formal politics the natural next step for a protest movement? Or are there other ways of sustaining the democratic energy created by mobilization?
No, I don't think forming a party is the automatic natural next step of a protest movement. I don't think that's the thing. What I mean is, in my generation, in like for instance, the previous generations, like we have in Sri Lanka, we have one of the first Trotskyite parties of formed in South Asia, right? So we have a long tradition of left political parties, which we have a long tradition of left political parties in Sri Lanka, and people's movement before perhaps the early 1990s, people movement have been connected to, whether it be trade unions, whether it be farmers movements and so on, has been connected to these left political parties. So in my generation, that was not the reality. I suppose neoliberalism has set in place since the 1970s. Right-wing parties were very strongly in power. They were co-opting trade unions, they were co-opting farmers' movements. NGOs were proliferating, and it was not membership-based NGOs, which we saw in the 1980s, and before that, it was donor-funded driven NGOs. So there was a political or a terrain shift happening in the political spaces. So my generation was not, we were not so bent on being part of a political movement if we have to engage in politics. Like in left spaces, we often speak of a political party leading the political struggle, right? In my generation, that was not the case. We were all part of different political movements, and the Aragalaya was also an extension of that. So the political party which came into power after the Aragalaya, of course, had a history of an armed uprising called the Janta Vimukti Peramuna. They had an armed uprising in the 1970s and the 80s, and they never really had a chance of coming to power until the Aragalaya. So there was a social shift also towards social justice values, free education, free health, a more equal society, and so on. So there was a shift. And then some of us who were also part of this Aragalian political movement, we thought, no, we also should take up that political space, take up that electoral political space and contest. So there was also a party called the People's Struggle Alliance, which of course came after the Aragalaya. But I don't think that should be the natural, the next step of any Aragalaya movement. But since I was part of a political party and I contested for the elections and I was part of this all left political parties, now I believe that if you want to take mass movements and if you want to take people's struggles to the next level, or if you want to influence the state in terms of left policies and so on, there has to be a strong political party which is grounded in a left political movement. And I don't think we have that in Sri Lanka yet. If you take the current political party which is in power, the National People's Power, it is not grounded in people's movements. It was before it came to power, but after it came to power, it completely detached itself from people movement, and now it's getting its advice and its policies and its opinions from corporate leaders. So that's why we call it the corporate capture of the state, right? So we need a left political party in power, but that political party has to be very much connected and held accountable by a very strong political movement led by workers, farmers, fishers, and largely the working people. And that is not something which we have right now in Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Thanks, Swastika. Muntasir, when it comes to Bangladesh, and I think you were also very much nodding with what Avinash was saying about civil society, what lessons do you think that civil society organizations should take from these recent mobilizations and what happened afterwards?
Okay. The civil society organizations, what Avinash said, like uh, they're reduced to NGOs and fundings, you know. So Bangladesh is facing also that kind of thing. Um, but the lesson we should take, uh, like during July, we stood our ground and we, uh, um, you know, the Sheikh Hasina had to flee away from the country. That kind of thing happened. But now the fight is very systematic. You know, we have to fight the systemic corruptions, the policies, and accountability and transparency. Um, but the problem is we are facing the same cycle which happened during the army regime in the current regime, that the government is not listening. Um, but and in many cases, many civil society organizations or activists, they're kind of like saying like uh, we are the situation is very bad, or like um, like we are not seeing much hope. But some civil society people or organizations are doing analyzing what went wrong, where we lacked, and how we are not able to hold the government accountable. So there will be like our country has been very unstable, and the civil society was very afraid to act during last 2 years because of mob and everything. And you know how the Prothomalo Daily Star offices was burned, the leading medias of this country, how many cultural organizations like Chayanot, Udichi was attacked, um, and many civil society also NGOs are also got attacked. But there is no alternative other than political organizing for us to face, to tackle this, because there will be another election, and there will be another unrest, and another instability will happen. And these forces, these currently, uh, you know, um, um, dormant forces, the fascist forces, will also awaken. Uh, so we have to continue our political organizing. We have to keep knocking the doors. We have to do the extra work. That is how we will be able to, you know, um, tackle the situation. We will able to hold the system accountable. And uh, we are also trying to figure out like how we are going to fight the system and the systematic corruption and policies. We are continuously speaking up. The civil society is continuously speaking up. Also the the how Bangladesh American trade agreement is unfair, and how we need to revise it, or also the recent policy on the medicines and the privatizations of many um, government things. So we are also trying, but we are not, the CSOs haven't gained much success. But the thing is, we are much more vocal than the previous regime. Like the CSOs was not very, could not move much during the fascist regime, but now we have that kind of, um, what can I say? Um, we can put up a fight. We think, yeah.
Yeah.
So that is our take. Yeah.
Avinash, I know we've seen very different responses from governments across the region. How important do you think is the state response in determining what these mobilizations ultimately achieve?
Diksha, of course, it's critical. I mean, critical in the sense that, when I was talking earlier in the context in which what we saw, what happened in India a few weeks ago, it was precisely because what state has done in the last 10 to 12 years, completely stifling any form of space for dissent. And if you create that kind of a blanket, complete unitary system in which you don't have even a safety wall, for people to air their grievances, then it is going to burst out like this. And it is going to burst out through all kinds of, and much as you think that you have control all forms of media today, there are people, and especially this younger generation, will always find a new outlet and so on. So I think state has to create and remain true to the basic norms of democratic functioning. And why I'm saying this is also important because there is very critical political analyst who came out recently with this uh, phrase called age of hyperpolitics. So what is happening is that across the world, it's not only in South Asia, we see this one after another, we see that movements of rage driven by rage, that where people want to come out with massive rage on the streets, frenzied for a few days, and somehow that dissipates. And it, if not harnessed into more productive ways of engagement, then it will again turn itself on itself into another form of rage, so sometime sooner or later. I think what state needs to do precisely because of this is that if it refuses to further engage, what it is trying to do even after this movement in India is further trying to decimate, it's further trying to target, especially young girls who were part of this movement and so on, bring in charges, shaming them publicly through its militia and so on. If it continues to do so, it actually, this protest will find another way of organizing itself, and which is not going to be controlled by it. It will become much worse. So in that context, what is very important also at the same time for the people on the streets, young generation, is that this rage has to be also channelized through organized politics. And I think that is where it's not just CJP, it's also what people like Anjali represent, organized left movement, student politics, and so on. How do they bring these semblances of unity together to a somewhat anarchic looking, chaotic looking movement spilling out in the streets? You need to, and more state will try to actually contain it, more that will happen. And I think this is the tussle we will see in the coming days. Yeah.
Very true, Avinash. Anjali, we've heard about the origins and the significance of CJP. The protests have now been suspended. So what happens next? Do you see the CJP evolving into something more sustained? And what would be necessary for that transition to happen, if so?
So, the answer is very important. Established representation. I think a big and just am I should I?
Sorry, you're breaking up again. Yeah, you
Yeah.
can say that.
Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just saying that Dharmendra Pradhan's exit is not just any routine cabinet shuffle or anything. It is a very historic rupture in the political impunity of BJP RSS. And especially when their senior minister, somebody like Rajnath Singh, had the audacity to utter that in the NDA government, whatever we do, whatever we inflict upon the people, there will never be any resignation. So this arrogance was shattered on the streets by the youth of this country. So this victory also is very unprecedented in such a state of terror, because after when we had the 20th July call to go towards the parliament, brutality was unleashed in very unprecedented form. The state used pellet guns, tear gas, and beyond that, rubber gun was used on students. There were 4 to 5 students who are like still operation has to undergo surgery is due. They can go blind for the rest of their lives. There was a woman named Nutan who was shot in her ear, 3 to 4 stitches are there. So this is something that post protest also the state of terror that has been unleashed by this regime is something to look after also, because this is exactly the modus operandi this regime has been uh, maintaining their power over people in the last 12 years. After this, there were almost against the violence, there was a protest in Bihar. 400 people were incarcerated behind jails, and things and charges as grave as attempt to murder was put on them, and almost 30, 40 people are still behind bars. We were able to get a lot more out. And in Assam as well, in Bengal as well, Suvendu Adhikari, the chief minister of Bengal, uttered exactly this word that these are Friday people, indicating that these are the Muslim population who was causing ruckus, who were violent in the protest, be it areas as Nizamuddin, Selampur, Okhla in Delhi, which are predominantly Muslim majority areas. Students live there, young population, whole families of very historically who have been occupying this space. Muslim people, basically, a lot of Muslim people reside in these areas. So people who were coming to Jantar Mantar protest around 20th, after 20th, were picked up from these localities while they were booking a cab, while they were going to the metro station. So this is also something that we have to look at, that an attack in different forms has already been unleashed. So, along with this, of course, this is something the young people defied the entire architecture of control, the draconian IT surveillance rules, social media, which had targeted anti-Muslim, anti-Dalit profiling, which still is going on. So, when even the state has been very arrogantly trying to frame women protesters for the profanity language, how dare they abuse the prime minister, and there is a fear also that a prime minister who would, of course, this is very mockingly said, but a prime minister who will never come to do a press conference, would never address people of the country directly, is forced to make videos, is trying to copy the Gen Z tactics by making real short form videos in different from trying to again manage their optics political stunt. So what I see, how the way forward has to be, it has to be the way, even the use of social media. I think it is imperative for us to also acknowledge when the factory workers of Manesar and Noida were fighting against the labor laws, they were the ones who actually started making small videos that we are here, we are standing here, see the police has come there trying to beat us up, and that went to different parts of the country in a way that okay, this is happening here, we can also fight against this. And of course, after that, almost 700, 800 of those workers are put behind bars. But the use of social media is something that we saw in the workers' movement also almost 4 to 5 months just before the CJP thing happened. So for us, exactly there is the place where forces like ISA, the radical left, cannot allow this momentum to dissipate. The fight did not start on 6 June, nor can it end today. And with the how this year also started with campus-wide battle against, there was a dismantling of UGC equity regulations that came to safeguard social justice in higher educational institutions. The same bench which proposed the regulation said that this will cause more caste divide, where already the caste divide is so much evident in higher educational institutions. There is a proper, foolproof plan to keep the marginalized caste out of education. So the year also started with different protests taking shape, and it has to go like that. All the anger, all the battles has to be culminated, because when we look at the Gen Z uprisings in Nepal or the student movement in Bangladesh, which gives us a very clear warning that spontaneity without an organized left vanguard is a dangerous place to be. In Bangladesh, after the it was a very well thought and very something that we were also observing and trying to gain more inspiration from here, how the Sheikh Hasina's regime was overthrown, but how immediately the religious fundamentalist far right forces came and tried to fill that political vacuum, attacking minority democratic institutions. In Nepal, spontaneous anti-incumbent anger created openings where pro-monarchy far right Hindu nationalists again took the place. So spontaneous anger can bring down ministers or topple governments, but without a disciplined, ideological, conscious left vanguard, I don't think popular rage can be taken to a conclusive end. So I understand our task today is to ensure that something similar does not happen in India.
Thank you, Anjali. I think that's a very important point that you brought out. Since we don't have any questions from the audience and we want to finish it soon, we've got the last 4 minutes. Let me just ask one final question from all of you all and give you 1 minute to answer. What is the one thing you would like to see South Asian civil society do differently when the next major mobilization emerges? Swastika?
I think, as Avinash was saying, we have an idea of, we have an idea, of my generation at least, we have an idea that civil society means NGOs, and NGO means donor driven and donor funded, right? But in Sri Lanka, there is also this conversation which we say, whatever it is that you're paid for, if you're paid to do activism, then that's not going to create the change, because no one is going to pay you to push the system change. So even if you're working for NGOs, and many activists in my generation actually came into the politics through NGOs, right? Because that's where they got introduced to politics and activism and so on. So there's nothing wrong with that. But if your entire activism is based on the salary which you are being paid for the work you do, then that is not activism. That's not politics. So I would say it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter which kind of civil society we have in a country, but people who call ourselves or call themselves civil society, I think we have to move beyond workplaces, NGOs, and so on, and become more and more part of movements, particularly workers' movements, farmers' movements, student movements, fishers' movements, and so on. And I think that's how we're going to build a political civil society. And just one last thing is that despite information age and despite the fact that we always all the time connected, the linkages between third world state is very weak. And we really, in Sri Lanka, we really felt that, particularly when we were trying to build a interstate movement against debt. So I hope in the next coming days and months, we will also, different groups in different countries will also focus on, think about at least, how do we actually build this interstate movement of people? That is something, people and workers, that's also something which we have to think of. Thank you.
Swastika. Muntasir, any last comments?
Okay. Can you repeat the question again?
So what would you like to see the South Asian civil society do differently when it comes to the next mobilization?
The South Asian civil society must be um, unapologetic. They have to be. They have to connect to the mass people. Mass people, and keep that connection, um, and also, um, create construct, and we have to build a constructive way, um, and spread that constructive way to hold the governance accountable, and make the system work. Uh, make the system work. So that is there is a lack of implementations. We have, I think, South Asian countries have lots of fantastic policies, constitutions, and everything. But the problem is in the implementation. We are all talking, but we are unable to pressure the system to implement those. So we must have to join forces, more people collectively, and gain that, systemic, we have to bring that justice,
Thank you,
that,
Montessori.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, first advice, if being part of that, is to drop your fear and don't simply follow the fashion of the times. 15 years ago in this country, I'm sitting in a rights-based language was the fashion of the times. Everybody talked about government accountability, and today you have dropped it like a hot, potato, simply because there's a hostile government in place. Be true to your volition. Be true to what you actually claim to do. And if you're trying to preach the others, at least try to be that much courageous in your own everyday act. And certainly following what Swastika said, build larger solidarities, connect more, gain more strength and, in solidarities and connecting actually rather than feeling isolated. Yeah, that's it.
Anjali?
Definitely, I think the society must find a political neutrality and are actively aligned with organized anti-fascist movement and things as basic as the discord is that some protest is anti-corruption, pro-government, spontaneous civic movements, stripping these movements of their ideological and caste characteristics. Society also creates a they have institutions like which handle different attacks and having terms like so not clear informs how it happened in parts of the South Asia, giving space to the far right agendas.
Thank you, Anjali. And let me close this session up by thanking all of the speakers. I know all of you are very busy, and thank you very much for joining this conversation. And as you've all said, it is very important to build solidarities, very especially across South Asia on the various areas that we are working, not only with our own mass movements, but we as South Asians, we join solidarity with other mass movements. So with that word, let me close this session. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to all the audience that joined on the live stream as well as here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
You.
Thank you.